Texas. It reads, whereas Texas leads the nation in executions with more than 300 since 1982, when executions were resumed. Whereas the execution of an innocent person by the state of Texas would be a grave injustice and would undermine public confidence in our criminal justice system. Whereas 7 innocent men have been completely exonerated and released from Texas death row, and 107 people have been exonerated and released from death rows in the United States since the death penalty was reinstated in the 1970s. Whereas growing doubts concerning the competence and credibility of crime labs in Houston and Fort Worth raise serious questions about the performance of crime labs in other Texas jurisdictions, including in death penalty cases. Whereas an innocent person could be sentenced to death and that sentence carried out due to misconduct or errors by a prosecutor, defense lawyer, investigator, lab technician, eyewitness, or others associated with the case. Whereas there is public concern in Travis County that racial and socioeconomic factors influence the decisions to seek or impose the death penalty in Texas. Whereas death sentences in Texas are given almost exclusively to the poor. Whereas there is evidence of racial bias in the application of the death penalty in Texas. Whereas more than 65% of people on death row in Texas are people of color. Whereas nationally, over 80% of completed capital cases involve white victims, even though only 50% of murder victims are white. Whereas 10 major newspapers in Texas, including the Dallas Morning News and Austin American-Statesman, have called for a moratorium on executions in Texas. Whereas Texas currently does not give juries the option of sentencing a defendant to life without the possibility of parole as an alternative to the death penalty, whereas there is a lack of meaningful procedure to ensure uniform application of the death penalty from county to county throughout the state. Whereas January 31, 2000, on January 31, 2000, Governor George Ryan of Illinois, a supporter of capital punishment, placed a moratorium on executions in his state. And on May 9, 2002, Governor Parris in Gluttony of Maryland, also a supporter of death penalty, ordered a moratorium on all executions in his state until a study is completed into whether minority felons are unjustly singled out for the death penalty. Whereas over 80 city councils and other local jurisdictions around the country have already passed moratorium resolutions, including Atlanta, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Oakland, Detroit, Cincinnati, New York City, Buffalo, Tucson, Chapel Hill, Charlotte, Fayetteville, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and Durham, North Carolina, Lexington and Charlottesville, Virginia, Hay-City and Rollingwood, Texas, and whereas 2 committees in the Texas legislature in 2001 approved proposed constitutional amendments that would allow the voters to enact a moratorium on executions, while a special capital punishment commission studied the administration of the death penalty in Texas. Now therefore be it resolved that the Travis County Commissioners Court urges the Texas legislature to enact a moratorium on executions while a nonpartisan Blue Ribbon Commission studies the administration of capital punishment and submits its recommendations to the legislature to correct any injustices found in the administration of the death penalty, and in particular to make recommendations to eliminate the risk that innocent persons and persons with mental retardation or mental illness may be executed, to stop executions of juvenile offenders, and to ensure that the death penalty cases are administered fairly regardless of race, income, citizenship, and geography. And I move approval.
Second.
Perfect.
This has happened after all of the direct appeals and state habeas corpus appeals have taken place. My client was tried for capital murder while chained to a table in the courtroom. That's a fact that I think might influence a jury who has to determine whether or not that person poses a threat of future dangerousness, might influence their verdict. Unfortunately, because of the way the case was handled in the state courts, that point was not raised and could not be raised when we got into the federal courts and took that case before the federal judge. I am a supporter of the death penalty, but I support the death penalty if it's properly applied. I think it needs to be properly applied for citizens to respect it, to eliminate many of the objections to it. And so I believe a moratorium is necessary to examine the process by which we administer the death penalty, especially the quality of the representation afforded those who are charged with capital crimes at all levels through the state system. I think a perspective is necessary to consider this kind of action that affects the state law. It's real easy to support the death penalty for somebody who's committed some heinous crime, for example, against a child. That's pretty easy. But come at it from this standpoint. What if your son or your daughter were charged with a capital offense? How would you like the system to operate in that situation? I think we want it to be as near as perfect as possible, and the experience I had tells me that it is not that way now. And that has caused a lack of respect for some of the death penalty sentences in the eyes of the public. So I ask that you support this resolution today to ask for a moratorium to study the system. Thank you for this opportunity.
Good morning.
Morning.
My name is Andrea Kylan. I'm an attorney with the Texas Defender Service. Our office is a nonprofit law firm. We deal exclusively in death penalty cases, both at the direct representation level and systemic research and report publication. I'm here in support of the resolution, and I think the heart of this issue is, and what the resolution is all about, is caution. We know that in a system run by human beings, we are bound to make mistakes, and we've seen that across the country. We've seen that inside of our state of Texas. And what we need to look at when we recognize that our system makes mistakes is the degree to which checks and balances in place can catch those mistakes before they become irreversible. One issue in particular that I'd like to speak with you all about briefly this morning is the habeas corpus process. That is supposed to be the safety net in the system, the safety net to catch people who are innocent or undeserving of the death penalty. It is one issue where we have seen over the past 8 years a crisis in incompetent representation at that level. Our office produced a report that was published in December. The report is called Lethal Indifference: The Fatal Combination of Incompetent Attorneys and Unaccountable Courts in Texas Death Penalty Appeals. And what we found when we looked over the past 8 years at the level of representation in death penalty habeas corpus proceedings is shocking. We found attorneys who had been repeatedly disciplined for unethical behavior, attorneys who completely failed to fulfill their statutory obligation to investigate the case, attorneys who admitted by affidavit that they had done little or no meaningful work on behalf of their clients. One lawyer sent a letter to his client on death row after being appointed by the Court of Criminal Appeals. And in the letter it said, and I quote, "I'm trying to get off your case and get you someone who is familiar with death penalty habeas corpus proceedings." In December, a man named Leonard Rojas was executed by the state of Texas. His appointed habeas lawyer had been twice put on probated suspensions by the state bar. He had never before been appointed or handled a capital habeas proceeding, and he was at the time of his appointment mentally ill. 2 weeks after being appointed, he received a third probated suspension for unethical behavior, this time for having a psychological impairment that affected his ability to represent his client. He admitted by sworn affidavit that he had done no outside-the-record investigation. This level of representation was approved by the Court of Criminal Appeals. The lawyer then missed a critical filing deadline and forfeited any federal review of Mr. Rojas's case. And that's one story of many that could be told about how the habeas corpus process is failing. And the habeas corpus process is but one of many examples of the systemic flaws in our system. Mistaken eyewitness identifications, lying witnesses, prosecutorial misconduct, racial discrimination, you name it, the list goes on and on. And this resolution is a message that says we need to be more careful and we need to slow down and heed the warnings that we're getting from within our state and across the country, that there are mistakes, and we do, as a system, want to catch the mistakes before it's too late. I'd like to give you all a copy of our December report. Thanks. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alison Dieter, and I'm a member of the Texas Moratorium Network. And you've heard about the many injustices inherent in the system and how much they need to be changed, and that can come about through a moratorium and a study. And even if you are not inclined to accept these mistakes as mistakes, I'd like to present to you some of the facts on the cost of the death penalty, which is, at this point in our budget process, is a very onerous burden. In Texas, a death penalty case costs taxpayers an average of $2.3 million, about 3 times the cost of imprisoning someone in a single cell at the highest security level for 40 years, according to Richard Dieter, no relation, Executive Director of the Death Penalty Information Center in Washington, D.C. Former Dallas County District Attorney Norman Kinney states, even though I'm a firm believer in the death penalty, I also understand what the cost is. I think we could use the money better for additional penitentiary space, rehabilitation efforts, rehabilitation, education, and especially attention to juveniles. The Jasper County, Texas case of the 3 men accused of killing James Byrd Jr. has cost $1.2 million to date, with other expenses expected. This case has forced a 6.7% increase in property taxes over 2 years. I believe it took 1/10 of their budget. Court-appointed defense attorneys account for 28% of the costs, telephone, travel, and miscellaneous expenses 20%, salary 17%, courthouse security, court reporter, and so forth and so on. Dallas County is charging 6 prison escapees with capital murder in the killing of a policeman in December 2000. Governor Perry has given the county $250,000 from discretionary state funds to assist with trial expenses. At an estimated $2.7 million, these trials will be the county's greatest cost for a single homicide. And Jim Maddox said life without parole could save millions of dollars. And right now, I believe that a moratorium and study could also save millions of dollars. And I do have copies of this and a copy of several other articles here, and I have left them over there. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. My name is Suzii Paynter, and I work with the Christian Life Commission of the Baptist General Convention of Texas. We had a very interesting thing happen to us several years ago at one of our statewide conventions. A layperson got up to the microphone and said, "I am confused. What's wrong with our system? Would you please do a study and figure out how we can help?" From that layman's request at the public microphone at our statewide convention, we launched a 2-year study commission from Texans all around the state, prosecutors, judges, prison officials, chaplains, pastors, laypersons, volunteers in prison system, to do a 2-year study in both biblical, historical, and the Texas application of the death penalty. It's pretty unusual for a group of Baptists to come together over a topic like this, and there was a wide diversity of opinion upon our committee as they began their study. After 2 years, though, and a written report which we produced, our commission voted to come out with a moratorium, a stance for the moratorium on the death penalty in Texas. Many of our Baptist associations and even the Southern Baptist Convention nationally have voted in public and on their support of the proper application of the death penalty. But our Texas Review Commission could not see that the death penalty was being applied fairly and appropriately and consistently. not only with the terms of biblical justice, but with good, sound civic principles in our state. So as a person who speaks to and with Baptists across the state about public policy issues, I'm here today to represent a very grassroots organization who looked carefully with lots of different points of view to say, it's time for a moratorium. We need a recess. If our car is broken, we listen for that little click or clack or bump under the hood, and we don't wait till the transmission falls out in the highway before we take it in to be fixed. And that's our position, is it's time to listen to the voices, both national voices that are telling us we need to look at our system, voices within our own system, and people both pro-death penalty and people who are for the abolition of the death penalty, and everybody in between is saying, take a recess, let's look at it, and let's fix it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think, though, that for me, if one life is lost, that's too many. And I think we're beginning to go to a place that I'm not very fond of at all, and that is we seem to take life very lightly. And it's okay to execute great numbers of people, and that bothers me tremendously. And so I think if one person is lost, it is worth looking at our process. And then, we're real good at catching up sometimes on different issues. So I think that those people who are guilty, I think, will continue to face the judiciary here in Travis County, the prosecutors and attorneys, but that doesn't mean that we can't improve the process. And I look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on and sharing with us your experience, knowledge, etc. Based on all the reasons that you gave and what's set out in the resolution, I think the moratorium is the right thing to do. That's why I'm voting in favor of it. All in favor of the motion to approve? Did I move approval? I think I did. It's been seconded.
Second.
Show Commissioners Gómez, Davis, and yours truly voting in favor. Voting against, Commissioner Doherty. Abstaining, Commissioner Sunlighten.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming down.